All right, in this video, we're going to talk about how to use a debugger in IntelliJ. Beginner programmers typically use print statements when they're trying to figure out why something isn't behaving the way that it should be. You may print out the state of variables and figure out why things are crashing, let's say. There is a better way when things get really complex and you need to see the state of a whole bunch of variables all at the same time. You can actually use the debugger, which is this built-in tool in most IDEs, and IntelliJ has a debugger as well. And that's what we're going to be walking through right now. So I have some code here that is fairly trivial. It creates an array here on line 3, and then it just kind of walks through and assigns values into each slot inside the array. Wanted to remind you of a couple of things. First of all, if we wanted to run this code, it really doesn't do a whole lot, but I can just click on the green arrow and run lab 7, and then you can see nothing. There's an array index out of bounds, whatever that means. We'll get into that in just a second. But we can run it in a couple of different ways. So for example, you can see I can run it in debug mode, and if I were to do that right now, I would still get this error about index out of bounds and need to figure out what is going on and why I'm getting that error. So the first thing we need to do is to kind of walk through the interface. Right now, you've got controls that are up here in the upper right. We'll use those in a limited fashion, and we're really going to use this section down here on the bottom. Notice that we can go to console, which is what we're in right now, and then there's also a debugger tab that's going to allow us to look at the state of variables. So if I want to play around with the debugger, there's a couple of things. The first thing I need to do is to set a breakpoint. And what a breakpoint is a pausing point to begin inspecting the state of variables. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint here on line 3 because I want to walk through most of this program. It's only 10 elements that we're working with here. But if I were to left click here on line 3, you can see that I can set a breakpoint, and that's denoted here by this red circle, which is true in Visual Studio and other IDEs as well. So what it's going to do is as I begin running this in debug mode, it will pause here, and then I can walk through and actually see the values of the variables. That's where we're going to go with this. So to go ahead and start this in debug mode, I can click on it and I can drop it down here to debug lab 7. And right now it is paused. Notice the variables here, anything that's available to the compiler right now in terms of scope or what's active, what an active variable would be, is going to be listed right here. So right now, line 3 has not executed, so it doesn't know that R is a variable yet, but it does know that args up here is a valid string array. So if I wanted to go in and actually run the code line by line, that's what we're going to do. There is an icon right here. You can either press F7 or you can click on the step into icon and watch what's about to happen. So we're going to create this array, and we're going to be able to see all sorts of different values for that array. So if I do that, I'll click step into, and I want you to note what's on the interface. Now I purposely restricted it to be an array of 10 elements, but notice that Java automatically initializes everything to zeros for us. Because it's an array of float, it's 0.0. Now there's a couple different ways that we can view this. You can see it here on the screen, and this is a nice feature that's found in IntelliJ. Or I can drop this down and you can see that R is an array of 10 floats. And if I drop that down, then I can see each individual element inside the array, which is pretty cool because then I can figure out what's going on as I'm walking through each pass through this loop. So to do that, I wanted to point out that also notice that I is not available yet because we have not yet executed line 4. So to execute line 4, I can step over. And notice here at the bottom, it does say Java laying index out of bounds exception, but that's not actually an error right now. What it's saying is if you were to go one element to the left, then you would be out of bounds. But right now, everything is OK. You can see the state of all of our cells here inside the array are still 0. Right now, also notice that I has become active and I is currently 0. So let's see what's going to happen here on line 5. Line 5 has not executed yet. So let's go ahead and execute that. And we would imagine if I is 0, then I plus 1 is going to be 1, and we'll move the value 1 into array slot 0 because I is still 0. So we can drop that down, and you can see that's exactly what happened right here. That cell 0 now has the value 1.0. Okay. I have a continue statement here on line 6 to say if I is equal to 0, then skip over it. We want to go to the next iteration of the loop because we're done, right? Now notice that the debugger automatically puts up the value. It says if I is equal to 0, and it says yes, that's true. So what's going to happen is it's going to continue. It'll skip over line 7 and go back to the top of the loop. So let's go ahead and go into that, step into, and notice that we're back at the top of the loop. The I++ has not yet executed. You can see that I is 0 here, and it's also 0 down here. So going into the next step, I can click the icon here, and you can see I++ has executed. I is now 1. So we're now talking about array slot 1, in this case 2. So you can see we're going to click this icon here several times, the step into icon. You can see slot 1 is now the value 2, and that I is 1 down here as well. This is now going to be false. The debugger is telling us that. So we can go to the next thing and say, now array slot 1 is going to get whatever the value of I is, which is 1, divided by the previous element, which was 1. So when we execute this, you can see now that slot 1 has the value 1. And we're going to go back to the top of the loop and do this I++, right? So this is going to go on for a while. I'm just going to kind of step through it. Notice that when we start talking about values as we're walking through this, you're going to see a lot of the interface change here. One of the benefits of using the debugger is there are sometimes that I want to watch a variable. Let's say I wanted to watch I. If that's the case, what I can do is I can come over here to the watches panel, and I can add a new watch, and this will become apparent what it does here. But if I just type in I and hit return, then it's going to have the value of I over here constantly. It's going to kind of highlight that for us. Okay, I could also do other things, like if I really wanted to see the value of the third slot, let's say, I could put in array slot 3, and you can see that it's currently 0, right? So let's keep walking through this. All right, so as I start to go through this, you can see that the values are updating here. They're also updating here. And it gets a little bit more interesting. I'm just going to kind of click through it. You can see it's filling in values. Where it becomes a little bit more interesting is when I becomes 9, right? This is kind of the last time that this is going to be true. So you can see array slot 9 gets the value, it previously was 10. But now we're going to do this division inside of our code, and it turns out to be 2.46. Now, interestingly, we're about to change our counter and go from 9 to 10, and this is where our error actually is. So watch what's going to happen. I increment that, and it's saying, hey, your array index is out of bounds. If you were to try to use 10, then this is what's going to mess up, all right? So if that's the case, I can identify this, and I can stop running the debugger. Right here, you can see there's a stop icon, and I could fix it. And I could change that from less than or equal to less than, and then I could rerun it. And I can set the breakpoint anywhere I want to. I remove that one just by clicking it. I could set the breakpoint here if I wanted to see what happens after the for loop. All right, so if we were to run that, you can see it's just going to run. And then it stops right here, and there's no code past this point, but I can set these breakpoints wherever I like. So the main thing is, let's go back up here just to review, right? Setting a breakpoint is relatively easy. You can just left click on it, and you do have to run it in debug mode. So if I click debug mode and start tracing through this, you can see that I can watch variables, and I can drop this down, and I can see how the program is actually behaving. So that's the basics of it. You can watch any number of variables over here. I would recommend that you get familiar with this. Try to avoid using print statements except in the simplest of cases, and then really get comfortable with using the debugger. But those are the main ideas, and I hope that helped.